Okay, so the Geek Speak show here with a good friend of the show. He's been on before many times, Brian Selznick. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you again.
Yeah, welcome to San Francisco.
Hi there.
Good
Thank
to see
you.
you this time.
Thank
Usually
you.
you're on the phone with us.
Nice to be in person.
All you regulars, we haven't done the book club feature in a couple of weeks, so we figured let's do a special version of it this time. So Brian, you've talked about your other books that were on. We talked about the invention of Hugo Cabret when it became the movie. You have a new one coming. It's called The Marvels. Have it right here. It's coming out September 15th. So without giving the whole thing away, what is this one about? What's The Marvels about?
That's really hard to sum up. It's two stories, a little bit like Wonderstruck, the book I did after Hugo.
Yeah.
One story follows 5 generations of actors from 1766 to 1900. It's all told in pictures. And then the second story is all told in words, and it's about a boy in 1990 who runs away from a boarding school to go find an uncle who he's never met. And it's about how the two stories eventually come together.
So kind of like Wonderstruck, is it, do you have to read one first and then the other, or can you read them both at the same time, or how's that going to work?
Well, Wonderstruck was designed to sort of bounce back and forth between the two stories so they echo each other.
Right.
But for the Marvels, the first 400 pages are just pictures. So when you pick it up, it's, you just are inside this story made entirely out of pictures, and you don't reach the first word until about page 401.
Yeah, from your very first book, that's actually been something that you've just mastered at and you become great at it. Now, when you start writing the new stories, like The Marvels, for example, what comes first? Is it the illustration, or is it the text, or is it a little bit of both, or how does it come together?
I sort of have an idea of what I want the structure to be. Like, with Hugo, it was one story with words and pictures. Wonderstruck was 2 stories that wove back and forth. And The Marvels, like I said, was the 2 different stories, one after the other. But when I start, it's all words. I begin everything by writing what I want the stories to be, outlines of everything, and then I know which story is going to become pictures, and then I translate that story into pictures.
Yeah. So when you get into the book, do you change anything because the drawing comes out a certain way? It's like, well, you know what? Maybe I should change this around. Does that ever happen?
Well, my brain is a little bit more visual. And so the picture story, that once I figure out what all the pictures are going to be, generally that stays pretty much how I conceive of it. But the word story very often changes quite a bit. But my editor, Tracy Mack at Scholastic, as I was doing the final art for The Marvels, about 3/4 of the way through, she called me and said, Brian, I was thinking about the end of the picture story, and I think you might want to change this one part. And I realized I was annoyed at first because I didn't want to make any changes. But then I realized she was right, and that one change meant I had to then change everything about all the rest of the pictures. But luckily I hadn't done any of the final art, so I was able to do new sketches and go in the new direction.
Yeah, it's a creative thing. I get it sometimes too from my producers.
Yeah.
They say, we're doing it this way, then all of a sudden, no, let's do it this way. Well, what's all this for?
Right, but sometimes you need to go in that one direction before you realize the other way is the better way to go.
You started actually just drawing from kindergarten to what you're doing now. Any parent or any child that has that shows I like drawing, I like doing this, what kind of advice would you tell them? Keep doing it, or what would you say?
I mean, I think it's like anything that you like to do. When you are supported doing that, when you know that there are people who are encouraging you to do it and help make it possible for you to do it, that's such an important thing. And so I was really lucky because my parents were really supportive. I mean, my dad was an accountant, so he was mostly into worrying about money and numbers, but he really wanted his kids to do what they wanted to do. And then I had really good art teachers in school, out of school. I went to a good art college. So I feel like if you know what you like to do, just make sure that you keep doing it. And, and if you're an adult who sees a kid who has a potential in any field, whether it's, drawing or writing or sports or whatever it is, the best thing you can do is help those kids do what they love doing.
Yeah, then next thing you know, you'll be on the Geek Speak show being interviewed like Brian is. So I haven't read this one yet. I'm sure it's just as great as the other ones.
I hope you like it.
So look right into the camera and tell everybody why they should go out and get The Marvels on September 15th.
I think you should go out and get The Marvels on September 15th because it's a fun story. There's a lot of pictures. You can read a 650-page book in one day probably, so that's something. And I just hope that you'll like it. So thank you so much.
There you go. Brian Selznick on the Geek Speak show. Thanks, Brian.
All right, thank you.